Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 26th edition of the VCCA Fireplace series. Um, they're all wonderful, but tonight we have a very special opportunity to hear from two poets, both of whom were recipients of the Reynolds Poetry Fellowship. So we will call this the Reynolds Poetry Fellowship edition of the VCCA Fireplace series. That fellowship granted to both of these poets a 3-week residency at the VCCA. This evening we will begin with comments and poetry from Amanda Galvin Quinn. Amanda is a Mexican-American writer and educator from Texas, and we just learned is not in Texas anymore, but is now studying in Hawaii. She is the author of a chapbook, Songs from Brujeria, and co-editor of Color, Poets' Ways of Making, an anthology of essays on transformative poetics. She's been nominated for a Pushcart Prize, Best New Poets, and Sundress Publications Best of the Net. She was a 2016 AWP Intro Journal Project Award winner, a 2018 Best of the Net winner, and a finalist for the 2017 Poetry Society of America Chapbook Fellowship. Her poetry can be read both online and in print journals such as Hayden's Ferry Review, Puerto del Sol, Southampton Review, and many, many others. So, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. And thanks so much to everybody who's also working behind the scenes to make this possible. I'm excited to be here digitally, chiming in from Hawaii. So I'm excited to share some poems from my chapbook, as well as my debut collection that's coming out next year. So some of these poems are going to be from my chapbook, as well as, again, my collection that's coming out. So I wanted to start with this first one. It's fascinating to revisit some of these poems because there's definitely a line of matriarchs in my work and mother-daughter relationships. And I recently became a mother, so revisiting these poems are resonating a little bit differently now. So this first one is titled Verses. I fear the words my mother has trouble spelling, using THEIR there when she really means there, THERE, or your when she really means your, YOU, apostrophe RE. I see her in the study sounding out a word, typing, then retyping, but never able to make the red underline disappear. I'm 10 and she calls me to check her spelling. How do you spell appreciate? She pronounces the word appreciate. I correct her, but my mouth carries the hesitation of her tongue, of her fragmented education, the belief that intelligence is hereditary. Before bed, I repeated letter and leather to teach my tongue the difference. I practiced writing verses of the Bible to teach myself the difference in myself versus her. And I think about what's passed on from one generation to the next, what we pass on, not only to our children or what we inherit from our families, but also what we share with our friends and what energy we give to them as well, and where we take some of the things we've learned. So this is another one that also has my mom, my mother in it, and her first encounter with puberty and being in adolescence, and her interaction with her mother. first time she interrupted Mama. The first time she interrupted Mama, she was talking with her sisters in the kitchen. Arroz simmered in its tomato juice. The blood smeared between her legs was brighter. At 13, she thought, I'm dying. She thought, I will die if Mama sees these stains blooming in her shorts. Fear cut into the laughter like hands caught in the stove's flame. Mama uncrossed her arms and followed her to the bathroom. With one arm, Mama reached under the sink. In the cracked mirror, her questions never left her mouth. Am I sick? Will I bleed forever? What do I do with all this blood? Am I dying? Mama handed her a square wrapped in pink, but didn't explain. Did your brothers touch you? She stared at Mama's face, calm but impatient. She tried to figure out what she meant by touch. Did your brothers touch you there? She shook her head. Mama nodded, closed the cabinet, put that in your chones. Mama shut the door behind her. The kitchen's noise rose, and she never interrupted her again. And I think also a lot about advice that I will give my child in the future, and also thinking about being younger and what advice I took from my own mother, and what advice that I was really struck by and resisted. And this next one is advice that I actually received, and even now I am very resistant to it. And of course, being a poet, being a writer, we tend to definitely be in conversation with the world around us. And as a poet and writer, we manifest that into our writing. So this next poem is titled, You Have to Be Ready. You have to be ready when they are. My mother hands me dishes to wash, even when you're not. I watch her turn the faucet on. My hands heat under the water, and I wonder who told her to be open 24/7. How many times did she lie split open, reviewing a list of things to be done tomorrow? Did she learn over the years where to kiss, when to touch, how to make her husband finish quick, to end the chore, to make sure he doesn't drift into another woman's body, to say yes, to make more time, to be the good wife, the one who reflects, the one who makes floorboards reflect the moon when it comes in through the window? And I think I have time for one more. Yeah, one more. And I also am reflecting a lot in this past week or two, or this first month, because as I mentioned before, I just recently became a new parent, a new mother in the last 4 weeks. So I'm also thinking about absence, and how we as parents try to do what we can, or how to capture memories. Something I hadn't really thought much of. And looking back, trying to think of how my parents also tried to capture memories, even if it was around holidays or taking pictures, going out somewhere, and what happens if you grow up without those. So I'm going to close with this last poem titled Notes on Absence. Notes on Absence, Houston, Texas. If I went by the memory of photographs, my mother's life began at 16. There was one of her posing with coworkers in fur coats at Sears, and one of her in high-waist jeans up against a car, a glamour shot with black leather held up against her left cheek. I can see myself one Saturday afternoon in the hallway, too hot outside, the closet open, the plastic tub full of albums unlidded, worn albums spill and scatter on the floor like stepping stones smoothed over by glossy currents older than me. I see the studio print of my father as a baby, a blue onesie, the same one framed on the wall at my abuela's along with others. I sit on the floor looking into these windows of stillness. But was I only curious about my father's baby pictures? Did I even ask once about hers? Or worse, did she walk away and cry the day I asked, "Where are you? Why don't you have baby pictures?" Did she answer me and I just forgot? When my mother was 48, her cousin uploaded a photograph, and I saw my mother on the far left in her baby dress, her sister beside her, her three older brothers with matching checkered shirts, their souls exposed. There is no timestamp, no cursive to examine on the back. I know her family moved too much. A single mother with 6 children would have to move too much. And pictures were a luxury left behind for blankets and pans. But now there's this one, a 4x6, black and white, and I can see myself in her outstretched fingers. Thank you.
Amanda, that was wonderful. I'm sure that some of our listeners will have questions for you, and we will put those off until the end. Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you all Patricia Spears Jones, who is a poet, writer, an educator, a literary curator, and an organizer. She is the author of 4, this is really impressive, 4 full-length poetry collections, most recently A Lucent Fire, New and Selected Poems, and 5 chapbooks. Her poems are widely anthologized, including in African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle and Song, and have appeared in the New Yorker, Plume, and Brooklyn Rail. She received the prestigious Jackson Poetry Award from Poets and Writers in 2017. She's curated literary events for St. Mark's Poetry Project, the Center for Book Arts, and the Brooklyn Rail, as well as her Brooklyn-based word series, Words Sunday. She's an emeritus fellow for the Black Earth Institute and an organizer of the American Poets Congress. So now, Patricia, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Amanda, for those gorgeous poems. Sounds like you have, like most poets, have a great mom. I have a few, but I'm going to stick to something else. I am very grateful to the VCCA and the Reynolds Fellowship for the great chance to return to VCCA, and I met some wonderful people and focused a lot on memoir and essays, but I also wrote, I finished a poem and I started another one. So I'll read a little bit of that. But I'm going to start with the last time I was at VCCA, I literally was working on this. And I wanted to give a shout out to the staff there because at some point I lost almost all of the files for this book. And with their incredible help, I was able to recreate it and to finish a decent version of it to send it off to the publisher. So VCCA staff are the best. Okay. And this is from a chapbook that's called Living in the Love Economy, and that's part of the New and Selected. Back to school. My neighbors, many of them children, are biking up and down the crooked sidewalk. The girls are talking who is going to wear what. New and very clean sneakers are on every other kid's feet. Parents are tallying the cost, cutting what they can. Next day, these children will put on that cool for school or too school cool for school look. The 1950s lives on Macon Street, Bedford Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, 2009. Moms, dads, aunts, uncles, cousins, watching these children playing, scheming, grow. My neighbors say hello, good morning, good evening, how are you as you pass by. Morning glories on the fence behind the tent meeting house trumpet the color and tenacity of a people for whom few jobs, bad luck, bullets are real as real can get. And yet, there's the albino kid playing with the prettiest girl, her caramel colored face stern as she sends him and the other boys off on some mission of her design. Who will win her heart years from now? When they do, when they do the back in the day moment, what will they say? Shy enough to remember when they all knew each other's secrets? A vibration hums this short street like blood pulsing through healthy veins, constant, predictable, mysterious. The girls in that poem are now graduates from high school, and the little albino boy has become not so nice, unfortunately. But one of the things about living in any place for a long time is that you make a connection to it. And when things are disrupted, you then realize what's lost. I wrote a essay called Remember the Snail. Not going to read the whole thing, but it has a lot to do with what was once the back of the tent meeting house, which was is now covered by a horrible, ugly apartment building. On a day when yet another man takes an automatic rifle into a public space and guns down people, it's almost a luxury to consider the loss of snails. The harbingers of spring poked up their twin towers out of shells and lubricated the edge between sidewalk and field. How did they do that year after year for decades, for centuries? This was Lenape land. Hunting grounds, then settler farms. It must have been extraordinarily lush. Now, faux flowers sit in poorly maintained pots in front of the apartment building. And the quote, return to normal, unquote, is not so much about no mask or the ability to hug. It seems to be about the chance to make mayhem, to gather drunken on a beach and urinate on police, to buy automatic weapons where you can target Asian businesses and kill women, or in Boulder, voices say go to a supermarket and then 10 people die. The rude ways of privileged Americans are contemptible, predictable. This is not a new normal, it's the same old shit. These are the people we fear the most because they are many alienated, disaffected, and paranoid men who so easily obtain and then use weapons. So hope is hard to feel right now, even as the politics of change, some progressive, most moderate, take place. A year of lockdown has given the planet some pause. Birds seem to sing louder, the waterways are clearer, and those who desire better ways to create and sustain community are busy trying to do that. I see that, and it provides some satisfaction. But those dead women, the lost school year, the prevalence of political backlash, corruption, where can we mitigate these tropes that float about us like errant pollen, making way for unsustainable development? We need our snails. We need our worms, our soil, our grasses, even unto city. We need to breathe. We need our fields. They are not luxuries. So I've been working on my memoirs about coming to New York in the early 70s and living on the Lower East Side, the East Village, where very few Black and brown, a lot of brown people, but not very many Black people lived, especially artists. But there were a bunch of us, and I've been writing about this and publishing some things, and mostly these are all stories about crisis. And then one of the joys of being at VCCA is I thought, wait a minute, I had fun. So this is part of the fun section with a little bit of something in it. Basically, it's generally the episode is called Body Heat, and it's about the New Eurekan Poets Cafe, and it's about the fact that women at the cafe did not adhere to the patriarchal order. We had our own fun. Summers in cities are meant for the young. Children running around the park, swinging and swings, shooting hoops, babies crying, hot and noisy and undaunted by the sun. Or so the East Village seemed to be. Adults were inside restaurants, coffee shops, bars, apartments, where one room was always cooler than another or at some double feature. Did not matter what the movie. Air-conditioned theater was the best advertisement for any cinematic experience. Or you hung out in lofts and clubs where musicians improvised with genius, panache, passion. Well, that is basically what I did, along with wearing shorts, sandals, cotton blouses, especially peasant blouses. The parks could be treacherous. Druggies, winos, purse snatchers, random crazy guys. So, the search for a place to see and be seen, to poet and to listen, to dance with abandon, well, there was the New Eurekan Poets Cafe. It was a raucous escape into salsa music, colorful artwork, a bar that did not serve coffee, or did it? And many characters working on their local legend status. When I started going to the cafe, it was a storefront on East 6th Street between Avenue A and Avenue B, almost mid-block. It was not large, but somehow the place contained multitudes. If there was air conditioning in the cafe, I never felt it. There was a great deal of body heat. The community within the cafe served up a serious hipness. Staccato beat as salsa and merengues and cha-cha-chas mixed with soul and disco records spun by a DJ. The tiny dance floor was never empty when the music started. Never. It was Black and Latino Lower East Side swagger. Young poets, artists, actors, musicians, dramatists, drug dealers, and other members of the demi-mondaine all swirled about on that vibrating floor. Men decided who performed when and for how long there. If there was a major program, your female name might not be on it. Oops, forgot, couldn't remember, really didn't give a shit. Despite the lack of support for women writers, artists, poets, we went there just the same. You can't change something if you ain't there. Women were not to be thwarted. We were seekers too, of friends, lovers, community. We wanted to be part of the performance mix, have our voices heard, wanted to take the stage. It was not easy. We were as various as the men. Edwina Tyler and other women conga players were lesbians. Model actor women seemed to swing this way and that. But like me, most of the women were straight but fast. We wanted to set the tune. Artistic ambition and romantic attraction were woven through the thread of the cafe's social and cultural weaving. We weren't waiting for Prince Charming, but if someone charming was about and princely, we might give him a turn. So, my life got really lively when I dated a genuine Puerto Rican rock and roll lead singer, Edgar Rivera. Edgar was a great musician, handsome, charismatic, and about 2 years too early to make his sound work commercially. I was an unlikely girlfriend. I was not a groupie. I was a poet trying to get her own bearing, but I totally supported what he was trying to do. This is the fun part. Edgar lived in an abandoned garage on Avenue B. It must have been 2,000 square feet. He shared it with a guy who rode a motorcycle and the guy's model beautiful Thai girlfriend. I never quite got the story of how this all came to be. The loft was where he rehearsed. It had a huge bed, musical instruments, the motorcycle, which I think was a Triumph, and the Thai model's dressing area. She wore garments meant more for the Upper East Side than the East Village. We would hang out on the weekends, one of his gigs, or some other event until 3 in the morning when the bars closed, and then go to the after hours joint where Edgar and his motorcycle roommate were sort of security. The after hours joint in Sheridan Square opened around 3:30 a.m. and the few times I was there, it was packed. Talk about body heat. There were Sikhs and dykes and hipster couples, queens, musicians, guys who looked like extras from Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets. Wait staff from the village's bars and restaurants talking and dancing and rubbing up on each other. Because after last call at all the adjacent bars and restaurants, staff members and their best or newest friends would go there. I took my friend Charlotte with me, and some slickster sidled up to her asking her name, and she made up a new moniker. Wish I could remember. She was so game for the game. The joint is probably the most racially and economically diverse space I ever saw in New York City. Possibly the sexiest and oddly the safest. And I'll finish with a poem that I finished at during the residency. And I thank Patricia Chow for helping me with this poem because she was like a great listener. Reading Julio Cortázar after turning 70. Years ago, there was your story about a man named John Howell. John Howell, the one I knew, read this story knowing that there was no way that Cortázar had heard of him and so knew he was not inspiring. Thus, an Anglo named protagonist slumps into invisibility. Jumbled jazz steps mocking robust gargoyles seen by earnest youth. The crosses born in old books are dropped here. There in dreams fit for surrealists on holiday. What if the spire was a spoil as in fencing, bird a drum as in microtones, and the driven snow is cleverly disguised as salt? Can I call you Julio? Will you allow me to conjure your handsome face in the bowl of my two hands? Warping demons of vague collapses eroticized a hemisphere, a new world imagination, the new world's misdeeds fraught. Along the lines of cocaine and the mansion near the Tour Eiffel, exile is always a bitch. Tarred walking boulevards, scarred but steady, somehow refusing to give in to the give up. El Maestro strokes one letter after the other, dangerous tempo like the tango, wrapped in rules demanding rupture. Barrels flare flat fires on the Bowery where winos sing and policemen shuffle. It's the 1970s, and Paris is in the distance, and Buenos Aires is floating, cloud city, home of generals, divas, balladeers flung against prison walls. In that earlier book, is there poetry in it? The auteur leaves for the continent, and it is not Africa. Julio, your acquaintance with the fantastic, the heart too heavy to share, takes a parallel road, the one where the writers are thrilling, handsome movie star ready, but that is the illusionary traverse, the floating countryside. Where is your jazzed lair? The white cat in his white hat, shimmering horn, the jazz lyre, levity in the soulless smoke, a miserly tease, heart beating and night vision eyes, hooves across cobblestones, the marais tender, crying for dark-eyed woman's plaintive song, like North America, sustained with tobacco and lies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both very much for that reading. I'm going to open this up to questions for listeners and viewers. I guess I should say viewers. If they have any, they can post them as they have some other comments in the chat. But while we're waiting for that, I have one of my own to ask both of you. And Amanda, perhaps you can answer first. And I'm just very curious. When we meet one another at the VCCA, we're already recognized and established poets or writers or painters or whatever, but that hasn't always been the case, needless to say. So I'm wondering how and when you knew yourself that you were a poet.
That's a hard question. I don't, because a part of me is very, very hesitant to be like, oh yes, I'm a poet now, and I think it's something to just keep working at, or at least I guess my relationship with my craft and with writing is something that's continuous. It's something that I continue to work at, especially when I think of just my mentors who have been writing for such a long time, and the people who I encounter. I still feel like I am still learning from them, from works that come before me. And hopefully by the time that I recognize, like, oh yes, I've contributed enough, it'll be many years down the road. So I don't know if that answers the question. Because I still feel very early in writing poetry and still getting footing and in being in conversation again with the world and what my life experiences are bringing my way. That is definitely changing also my relationship to writing and what I write about and the themes and topics and tones that are showing up. So it's definitely a continuous life force for me. When it comes to craft and this art, and this love for poetry and working with it. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Patricia, how about you?
I don't think that I thought of myself as a poet until I had published my first chapbook. And I think I was at the poetry project where everybody kept claiming that they were poets. But I think it's harder for women to say that. And I think what Amanda was saying basically is that she hasn't given herself that permission yet. And I think I think unless you are a performance artist, where, if you're a dancer or musician, where people kind of can figure out what you do, you don't have to worry about making a claim. But to say that you're making a claim in language which means saying you have authority, is different. And I think that for women, even now, it's still a very complicated question. But, once I both was successful and not successful and as a writer and kept on writing, that's when I knew I was a poet.
Great. Thank you. I see here that Stephen Petro, who is one of my fellow board members at the VCCA, has a question for both of you. He's not only a board member, but he is himself a fiction and nonfiction writer and has a new book out. But his question for both of you is, he says, for my fiction and nonfiction writing friends, I have a sense of what is considered a good day, usually a specific word count, but not always. But for a poet, what makes a good day? He asked me to answer as well, but I'm going to let you all answer first, and maybe I'll.
I mean, I have to. This is an anecdote. This is an anecdote from my first time that I was at VCCA, which was in the 90s. And there were a whole bunch of, there were about 2 or 3 poets, and everybody else was a fiction or nonfiction writer. And we would all meet at dinner time, and all of the fiction writers and nonfiction writers would say things like, I wrote 10 pages today, or I wrote, and then they would look at me and I would go like, I went for a walk, I read a book, Then I did a reading near the end of the residency. And I like ripped out like about 4 or 5 poems. None of them were short. All of them were intense. And they all looked at me like, when did you do that? So, as poets have a different rhythm, and we cannot, the whole idea of what a good day is or a bad day is useless on some level, because basically it's whether you can hear in your head the ideas and the language that you will eventually put on the page.
Yes, I would definitely agree, because the first thing that I thought about was seeing how we see the world. And Patricia, even you saying like you go out for a walk. I look at it the same way. How am I seeing the day? How am I pausing in the day? It almost becomes like a meditation in the sense of viewing the world around you, to look at the ordinary and to see that resonance into words, or just to see patterns, especially when we bring it down to the page. So a good day, I mean, I guess a good day, if I had to like pinpoint something literal would be like, when the poem just comes to you.
Mm-hmm.
But the poem can come to you in more than just writing it down. I know for me, when I compose, I usually have a line or 2 in my head for a little bit, and I sit with it. And it could be for a few days, it could be a couple of weeks or a month before it just starts to form itself, and before I come down to the page. So yes, but yeah, I feel the same way when I'm there with fiction and nonfiction. I got this many words today, 500 words or this, and it's like, that's great. Like I went out, like Patricia said, for a walk, or I like noticed this beautiful color by the river or something. So I would have to agree. It definitely comes down to viewing and how we perceive the world, and bringing it into poetry, or making that translation into it.
Well, I absolutely agree with you all. And I think that what we've said, in a sense, is that poetry is a visual art as well. I mean, we always go to the VCCA and we talk about the writers and we talk about the visual artist. But in a real sense, that is where so many of our poems begin. It's with an image or some. I mean, it's an art full of image, but it is visual as well as it is oral, and it's difficult to define beyond that. Except, but we know one when we see one. We know one when we've finished one. That's the other thing, I think. Sometimes we go through 40 and 50, at least I do, 40 and 50 different drafts.
Mm-hmm.
But we know it when we hear it and we see it on the page. Any other questions from viewers? Listeners, I should say, both, and viewers? Well, I thank you all for this. And do either one of you ladies have any parting comments you would like to make to those who spent time with us this evening, listening, and I'm sure enjoying?
Well, I would like to just say that I am so grateful for the chance to do 2 things. One is to obviously work on projects, at VCCA, but also to have the great opportunity to meet people in different, musicians and composers. I mean, at one of those, there was a Cuban composer, and she made me translate a Cesar Vallejo poem, and I performed it right then and there. So whoever was in the audience, you're the only ones that heard that performance. It was for you. Those kinds of serendipitous things happen in residencies, and I strongly encourage people to apply to VCCA for this or any other possible fellowship or way to get in, because especially writers of color,
Yes.
please do that. It's not gonna, I got there because Danny Tisdale and some other people told me apply. So, I did. Him and Jaime Enrique. So,
And we are
Yeah.
delighted that you did.
yeah.
Yes, and just thank you. Thank you for being here, for setting this up, for bringing us together for every, just VCCA for doing what y'all are doing. And the same thing goes is for anybody who's interested in applying, definitely apply, because like Patricia, I met a visual artist who was a painter who taught me how to shade paint colors. Like I'm sitting here thinking about it, how to take yellow or now I'm forgetting the primary colors and how to make different colors out of it, and to see that process, because yes, poetry is visual. It's also an oral tradition, and getting to have those conversations with different artists makes myself rethink my own poetry and how I sit down and come to the page as well. So it's a great environment to be in and to create. So yes, just thank you for the time, and thank you for, like I said, organizing this, and for viewers, thank you for being here and sharing some time with us.
Absolutely. And I want to stress that this has been recorded, and it will be available on the VCCA website later. You may want to go, ladies, back and see yourselves. But I would encourage all of those of you who have been here and have enjoyed it to spread the word to your friends, and come back again and again, and come back for the next series. And thank you all so much for your time. And it's been such a privilege for me to be part of this with you. And I thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Faith.
Yes, thank you.
You're
Thank you, Patricia.
You're just wonderful.
So, all right. Thank you all. And we'll see you, I hope, at the next series.